Hello, everyone, and I hope you're keeping healthy and well. And welcome to my Life in the Universe pandemic series. And this is a set of short talks about things to do with life in the universe, the origin of life, the evolution of life on Earth. Is there alien life out there? All sorts of things to do with life in the universe that I personally think are interesting, and I hope you might do as well. So these are just short talks to give you an introduction to this area. So the question I'm going to ask today is this one: Would contact with alien intelligence change us all? And this, I think, is a quite interesting question. Some people have described the question, are we alone in the universe, as one of the most profound scientific questions that the human mind has ever asked. I certainly think it is a profound question because the answer to it is really quite astonishing either way. If we're not alone in the universe, what is the nature of this other life? And if we are alone in the universe, then why have we spent the last 10,000 years building a civilization? Is it just so that we can be lonely in greater luxury? What's the point of all this stuff around us if we're just alone in the big black emptiness of the universe? So it's a very interesting question. It's a very profound question. But the question I want to address today is, if we did find intelligent alien life, would it profoundly change our outlook? And most people think that it would. Most people have this intuitive sense that, it would just be an astonishing thing to pick up a signal from an alien intelligence, to receive it, and to be in contact with another mind elsewhere in the universe. Surely that couldn't have any other effect than to radically change our view of our place in the universe. It would certainly change our view of our place in the universe because factually we would know that we are not alone. So scientifically, there cannot be any doubt that finding an extraterrestrial intelligence would change our perspective. The question is, would it really radically change us as humans and our society? And it may astonish you to know this, but we actually know what the answer to this question is. It is not speculation. People have conferences to discuss this, but in my own view, this is not a matter of speculation. If we go back a few centuries, we come to a society where people did believe in extraterrestrial intelligence. Bernard de Fontenelle published in the 17th century a famous book at the time called Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds, and it was about alien intelligence. It's an absolutely delightful book. Even today, you read it, and it is just a wonderful piece of writing. And it's all about a rather intelligent marquis who's interested in knowing about astronomy and the solar system. And she's sitting in a garden, and Bernard meets her over a few days, and they talk about the solar system and the structure of the solar system and whether the moon may be inhabited. And they come to some sort of conclusion that it's very likely that the moon was inhabited. And today, of course, we know that the moon is just a dry, rocky world. But in the 17th century, people did not know that. And there were a large number of people in our society who believed that there were people living on the moon. If we fast forward just a century to the 18th century, we find famous astronomer William Herschel writing down this astonishing statement. He said, I am almost convinced that those small, numberless circuses that we see on the moon are the works of the lunarians and may be called their towns. And of course, he was observing asteroid and comet craters. What he didn't appreciate at that time is that when an asteroid or comet strikes the surface of a planet, it forms an almost perfectly circular structure. And it does that at any angle. At any angle an asteroid or comet comes in, it forms a circle. It's just part of the dynamics of the process. You actually have to be coming in at really rather an oblique angle to the surface of a planet to cause a non-spherical structure. So this is just a product of the dynamics of impact events from asteroid or comets. So if you look at the surface of the moon, what you see is lots of perfect little circles. And if you don't know about asteroid and comet impacts and how they occur, which of course Herschel did not, you would look at those circles and think they were suspiciously round. And his conclusion was that they are the works of the lunarians, these people who lived on the moon, and the raised ramparts around these structures were their fortifications. And in fact, Herschel's observations are a warning from the past about over-optimism to do with alien life, a problem that still plagues us today, and also a warning about good old Occam's razor, which is a scientific principle first elaborated by philosopher William of Ockham, which is that you should pick the simplest explanation, or the one that involves the fewest number of assumptions. Herschel probably should have assumed that his knowledge of geology was not sufficient to understand these structures rather than attributing them to alien life. Anyway, that's rather getting away from our point. The point from in terms of the discussion I want to raise here is that William Herschel, a very well-known astronomer of the time, was convinced there were aliens living on the moon, and so were a lot of other people. And so it goes on, even to the early 20th century. Percival Lowell thought he saw canals on the surface of Mars being built by a civilization channeling water from the polar ice caps to their desiccating, beleaguered cities. He even wrote a book called Mars as the Abode of Life, in which he described these canals that he thought he could see on the surface of Mars. And many people at the beginning of the 20th century believed that there were intelligent Martians. Even more astonishingly, in 1900, the French Academy of Sciences offered a prize called the Prix Guzman, which was offered to the first person to communicate to extraterrestrial intelligence. And Mars was not allowed to be one of the civilizations you communicated with because it was considered to be too easy. Such were the assumptions that there was life on Mars. So you can see that right up to the early 20th century, people believed in intelligent civilizations elsewhere in the universe. So we have 200 years here, at least, where people seriously believed not only that there were potentially civilizations from other stars that might send us messages, but they were here in our own solar system, living on our own planet. And it had no effect on people's perceptions of who and what we are, and nor did it affect their behavior. Well, it's very difficult to tell whether it did affect people's behavior, but we have no evidence that there were less wars or people were more peaceful or there was a greater sense of internationalism and globalism because of aliens. There's no record of people saying we should build a United Nations because if these aliens come and invade us, we need to get together. How about we organize ourselves globally? There's no evidence of any of that. People just went about their lives quite happy that there were lunarians on the moon or people on the surface of Mars digging out canals. And if you think about that for a moment, it's not very surprising. Why would you expect alien intelligence to affect your everyday life? When you go to the supermarket, you don't look at the vegetables and say, I really don't feel like eating potatoes today because those lunarians on the moon, for some reason, they just don't make me hungry for potatoes. So your everyday decisions are not really affected by whether there's anyone on the moon. If you're an admiral deciding where to put your aircraft carrier fleet, are you going to put your carrier fleet there or there? These decisions are decided by military threats, military strategies, not whether there are people living in fortifications on the moon. So from the smallest everyday decisions right up to the highest political decisions, there seem to be no decisions that would really be affected on a day-to-day basis by alien civilization. Could it change our perspective, our culture, our sense of togetherness? Well, certainly we have evidence that these things can happen. The environmental problems that we face today are increasing our awareness of our need to sort out these problems on a global scale. So there's little hesitation in saying that when we are confronted by something that is supranational on the global scale, we can act globally. In fact, the Montreal Protocol to ban the chemicals that were destroying the ozone shield is a wonderful example of successful international cooperation. So certain crises, even very present crises, can stimulate international cooperation. So one might ask, why wouldn't extraterrestrial intelligences do the same thing? Well, of course, the difference between the environmental problems that we face now and extraterrestrial intelligence is that environmental problems will affect us and they will affect the next generation and future generations as well. So there's a real impact there on our lives, and you can see where the motivation comes from to do something about it. But if there are lunarians minding their own business in a crater on the moon, why would that really change our perspective of how we go about our lives or how we operate on the international scale? It would seem to me that we would only really change our global perspective if those aliens somehow threatened us. If we saw them building spaceships on the moon and preparing to send them to the Earth, maybe that might change our perspective. So over 200 years of history, we have good evidence of people who had a genuine belief, not just a belief, they were absolutely convinced there were aliens elsewhere in our own solar system. They weren't even speculating. Some people really thought it was a done deal, these aliens existed, and yet it didn't change their behavior. So I'm skeptical about whether a signal from an extraterrestrial intelligence would really change us as people although it certainly changed our scientific perspective of where we sit in the broader scheme of life in the universe. I have little hesitation. It would excite us for a long time. The media would go crazy. There would be several months of frenetic media attention about these aliens, books written, films written, but would it change our internal core characteristics, our behavior as a species? Perhaps if we picked up a signal from some large fleet of alien spaceships on the edge of the solar system, perhaps in the Kuiper belt, lots of alien intelligent chatter going on at the edge of the solar system, suddenly one day was picked up by astronomers, that would be rather chilling, and it might focus minds a little bit more than a few lunarians digging holes in the surface of the moon. But that shouldn't, of course, detract from our excitement in trying to find these signals. There's no doubt about it that finding we are not alone in the universe, and particularly not alone with respect to extraterrestrial intelligence, would be a stunning advance in our understanding of life in the universe. But culturally, would we change? I'm a little bit skeptical. Maybe you have a different view on this, but I do think it's rather interesting that we have centuries of experience of people belonging to a civilization that were convinced of alien intelligences. And perhaps by looking back into the past, we can get some idea about what our potential response would be if we ever made contact with alien intelligence. That should not stop us from continuing to look for alien signals. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, a fascinating and interesting area in the search for life in the universe. Thanks a lot for joining me again. Take care of yourselves.